There are moments in life that split time cleanly in half, before and after. The kiss happened at 11:43 on a Tuesday night in October. And I know this because I was checking my phone when Gabriel said those words that changed everything. You're different, you know that. We were sitting on the roof of our apartment building, legs hanging over the edge like we had done countless times before. The city stretched out beneath us in its usual symphony of distant noise. Cars threading through streets 6 stories below, the occasional drunk college student shouting something unintelligible, neon signs from the bodega, and the late-night laundromat casting their pink and blue glow against the darkness. The air had that bite to it that meant winter was coming, sharp enough to make me pull my hoodie tighter around myself, but not cold enough to drive us inside yet. Gabriel was leaning back on his hands, casual as ever, his dark hair catching the light from the rooftop access door we had propped open behind us. He had paint under his fingernails. There was always paint under his fingernails, and a smudge of something blue on his forearm that I had noticed earlier but hadn't mentioned. He wore his clothes like he wore everything else in his life, with a kind of effortless confidence that I had always envied and never understood. We had been talking about nothing in particular, the way conversations drift when it's past midnight and the world feels smaller, more intimate. He had been telling me about his latest painting, something abstract that his professor had called promising but unfocused, which was probably the most accurate description of Gabriel I had ever heard. I was half listening, more focused on the way his voice carried in the cool air, the way he gestured with his hands even when he was lying back, like he couldn't tell a story without his whole body being involved. The conversation had meandered from his art to my computer science classes, to the playlist he had made me listen to earlier that week, to whether the new Thai place on 5th Street was worth the 20-minute walk. Standard territory for us. Safe territory. The kind of easy back and forth we had perfected over 2 years of unlikely friendship. Then his voice changed. Softer, more deliberate, like he was handling something fragile. You're different, you know that. I turned to look at him, caught off guard by the shift in his tone. Different how? I started to ask, but the words never made it out of my mouth because Gabriel was already moving, already leaning forward, already closing the distance between us with the same unhesitating confidence he brought to everything else in his life. The kiss was sudden and warm and tasted like the coffee we had shared earlier. It was soft and certain and completely unexpected, and it stole every word I might have said, every thought I might have had, every carefully constructed wall I had built around the feelings I had been carrying for months without admitting them even to myself. My breath caught somewhere in my chest. Time seemed to slow and speed up simultaneously, the way it does in moments of crisis or revelation, and I realized that this was both. Gabriel's hand found the side of my face, thumb brushing against my cheek, and I felt myself leaning into the touch before my mind could catch up with what was happening. When he pulled back, it was only far enough to see my face, to search my eyes for something I wasn't sure I was ready to give him. The city noise continued around us, unchanged and oblivious, but everything between us had shifted into something new and terrifying and electric. I stared at him, lips still tingling, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Gabriel looked back at me with an expression I had never seen before, vulnerable but determined, like he had just jumped off a cliff and was still deciding whether to be proud or terrified. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no sound came out. What do you say to someone who has just rewritten the entire landscape of your friendship with a single gesture? What do you say when someone has just kissed you like they meant it, like they had been thinking about it, like it was the most natural thing in the world? Gabriel didn't seem to need an answer. He settled back beside me, closer than before, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of acrylic paint that seemed to follow him everywhere. Different, he had said. The word echoed in my mind, bouncing around like a pinball, gathering weight and meaning with each repetition. Different how? Different because I was quieter than his other friends, more careful, more prone to overthinking every word before I spoke. Different because I was the computer science major who preferred predictable algorithms to the chaos of human emotion. Different because I was the one who listened while others talked, who observed while others performed. Or different because he had noticed the way I looked at him sometimes when I thought he wasn't paying attention. Different because he had felt the electricity in the moments when our hands brushed, reaching for the same book, the same coffee cup, the same door handle. Different because he had sensed the careful distance I maintained, the invisible line I drew around my feelings and never let anyone cross. The questions multiplied in my mind, each one more dangerous than the last. I had spent 2 years perfecting the art of being Gabriel's friend, of fitting into the comfortable space he had made for me in his life. I had learned to laugh at his jokes, to listen to his stories, to be present without being demanding, available without being obvious. I had mastered the delicate balance of caring without expecting, of wanting without reaching. And now, in a single moment, he had upset that entire careful construction. I glanced at him from the corner of my eye. He was looking out at the city, seemingly unbothered by the monumental shift that had just occurred between us. His profile was sharp against the glow from the street below, jaw relaxed, breathing steady. If I didn't know better, I would think nothing had happened at all. But I could still feel the ghost of his lips against mine, still feel the way his thumb had traced the curve of my cheek. I could still hear the way he had said the word different, like it was a secret he had been carrying, like it was an explanation and an invitation rolled into one. The wind picked up, sending a discarded plastic bag dancing across the rooftop. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm started and stopped. The normal sounds of the city at night, the familiar backdrop to 1,000 other conversations we had shared on this same roof. But nothing felt normal anymore. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale slowly, quietly. Gabriel didn't seem to notice. He was still looking out the lights, still wearing that expression of calm certainty that made me want to shake him and kiss him in equal measure. Different. The word had been spoken, the kiss had been given, and there was no taking either back. The careful friendship we had built over 2 years had been transformed into something else entirely, something undefined and uncertain and full of possibility. I pulled my hoodie tighter around myself and tried to figure out what came next. I have always been the cautious one. Even as a child, I was the kid who checked twice before crossing the street, who read instruction manuals cover to cover, who chose the safe path over the scenic route every single time. My mother used to say I was born with an old soul, which was her polite way of saying I worried too much about everything. College had not changed this fundamental truth about me. While other students stumbled through their 20s with the reckless confidence of people who believed they were invincible, I mapped out 5-year plans and backup plans for my backup plans. Computer science suited me perfectly, a world of logical structures and predictable outcomes, where every problem had a solution if you just worked through it step by methodical step. I preferred the quiet corners of the library to the chaos of parties. I chose classes based on professor ratings and degree requirements rather than passion or curiosity. I had a schedule, and I stuck to it, had routines that gave my days shape and meaning. Tuesday and Thursday mornings in the computer lab, Wednesday evenings at the campus coffee shop with my algorithms textbook, weekend spent in my dorm room, or occasionally venturing out for groceries, or a movie if I felt particularly adventurous. Gabriel was my complete opposite in almost every conceivable way. Where I was methodical, he was spontaneous. Where I was reserved, he was expansive. Where I planned, he improvised. He lived like someone who had never learned to be afraid, or who had learned and decided fear was not worth the cost of admission. He was an art student, which seemed to surprise no one who met him. He wore paint-stained jeans and vintage band t-shirts, and always had a sketchbook tucked under his arm. His dorm room looked like a creative explosion. Canvases stacked against every wall, brushes soaking in mason jars full of murky water, tubes of acrylic paint scattered across his desk like colorful casualties. Gabriel talked with his hands, laughed too loud in quiet spaces, and had the kind of magnetic personality that drew people into his orbit without him even trying. He made friends the way other people made small talk, easily, naturally, without apparent effort or strategy. Our friendship had been an accident, really, a random dorm assignment during freshman year that should never have worked. I was the quiet roommate who went to bed early and kept his side of the room meticulously organized. He was the one who came home at 2 in the morning smelling like cigarettes and inspiration, who left coffee cups growing interesting molds on the windowsill, who played music just a little too loud and somehow made it feel like a gift rather than an imposition. We should have requested room transfers within a week. Instead, something clicked. Gabriel seemed to find my quiet observations amusing rather than boring. I found his chaos strangely soothing, like living next to a river. Constant motion that eventually became a kind of peace. When sophomore year arrived and we had the option to room together again, neither of us hesitated. By then, our rhythms had synced in ways that surprised us both. He learned to use headphones after midnight. I learned to tolerate the creative debris. He started asking my opinion about his paintings. I started sharing my thoughts about more than just code and class schedules. Our friendship had developed its own language over those 2 years. Late-night conversations about everything and nothing. Shared playlists that became the soundtrack to our college experience. Long walks through the city that surrounded our campus. Gabriel pointing out details I never would have noticed. The way afternoon light hit a particular building, the geometric patterns in chain-link fences, the accidental art in everyday urban decay. He had a way of seeing the world that made me want to see it too. Where I noticed systems and structures, Gabriel saw colors and textures and stories. Where I calculated risks and probabilities, he saw possibilities and adventures. He made me braver by proximity, more willing to venture beyond my carefully constructed comfort zone. Still, there had always been an invisible line between us, a boundary I maintained without fully understanding why. Gabriel attracted people effortlessly, classmates who wanted to collaborate on projects, fellow art students who hung around our dorm room discussing technique and theory, random strangers who struck up conversations with him at coffee shops and concerts. He moved through social situations like he was conducting an orchestra, knowing instinctively how to draw out the best in everyone around him. I watched these interactions from a safe distance, content to be the quiet friend who listened more than he spoke. Gabriel never made me feel excluded, but I never felt entirely included either. I occupied a specific role in his life, the steady presence, the reliable constant, the one who would always be there when the more exciting people inevitably moved on to other adventures. Except that I had been fooling myself about the nature of that contentment. The kiss had shattered any illusion I might have maintained about the simplicity of our connection. For months, maybe longer, I had been carrying feelings I refused to acknowledge, desires I buried under layers of rational thought and careful distance. I had noticed things about Gabriel that friends probably should not notice. The way he ran his fingers through his hair when he was frustrated with a painting. The sound of his laugh at different times of day, brighter in the morning, mellower late at night. The constellation of freckles across his shoulders that I glimpsed sometimes when he changed shirts. The way he said my name, like it was a word he enjoyed saying. But I had filed these observations away in the part of my mind reserved for things that were true but irrelevant. Gabriel was my friend. Gabriel was straight, as far as I knew. Gabriel was out of reach in every way that mattered. Until he kissed me on the rooftop and called me different, and suddenly every careful assumption I had made about our relationship revealed itself to be just another form of wishful thinking. The kiss replayed itself in fragments over the next 3 days. I would be sitting in my data structures class, trying to focus on binary trees and algorithmic complexity, when suddenly I would taste coffee and feel the ghost of Gabriel's thumb against my cheek. Walking across campus, I would catch myself touching my lips, remembering the warmth and certainty of that moment on the rooftop. Sleep became elusive. I would lie in my narrow dorm bed, staring at the ceiling, while Gabriel breathed steadily in the bed across the room. The familiar sounds of his presence, the soft rustle of sheets when he turned over, the occasional mumbled word from whatever dream he was having, had taken on a new weight. Everything felt different in the dark. Everything felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. During the day, we maintained our usual rhythms with an almost aggressive normalcy. Gabriel still left coffee cups scattered around the room. I still organized my textbooks in careful stacks. We still walked to the dining hall together, still shared earbuds while listening to whatever new song he had discovered. But there was something underneath it all now, a current of awareness that made every casual interaction feel deliberate and significant. Gabriel seemed remarkably unaffected by what had happened between us. He joked with our hallmates about weekend plans. He complained about his sculpture professor's impossible standards. He spread his latest painting across his desk and asked for my opinion about the color composition, just like he always had. If I had not felt his lips against mine, if I did not carry the memory of that moment like a stone in my chest, I might have believed I had imagined the entire thing. But I caught him watching me, sometimes when he thought I was not paying attention. During lectures we attended together, I would feel his gaze and glance over to find him studying my profile with an expression I could not quite read. These moments never lasted long. He would look away as soon as our eyes met, returning his attention to the professor or his notebook as if nothing had happened. By Thursday evening, the silence had become unbearable. We were in our room, Gabriel working on a charcoal drawing while I pretended to review code for my programming assignment. The scratch of his pencil against paper filled the space between us, a sound that had always been soothing but now felt like a timer counting down to some inevitable confrontation. I closed my laptop and turned to face him. "Gabriel," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. He looked up from his drawing, eyebrows raised in question. His hair was disheveled from running his fingers through it, and there was a smudge of charcoal on his chin that he had not noticed. "About the other night," I began, then stopped. The words felt clumsy and inadequate. How do you ask someone to explain a kiss? How do you demand clarity about something that had felt so clear in the moment, but had become increasingly mysterious with each passing hour? Gabriel set down his pencil and leaned back in his chair. He did not look surprised by the direction of the conversation, which somehow made me feel both relieved and more nervous. "What about it?" he asked, and his tone was careful, neutral, not dismissive, but not encouraging either. I struggled to find the right words. "You said I was different," I finally managed. "I need to know what you meant." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, studying my face the way he studied his art, looking for something specific, some detail that would help him understand the whole. The silence stretched between us, filled with the distant sounds of other students in the hallway, music from someone's room down the hall, the hum of the overhead fluorescent light that Gabriel was always complaining about. "You are different," he said finally, his voice softer than it had been a moment before. "Different from everyone else I know." "That is not an answer," I said, and I could hear the frustration creeping into my voice. "Different how? Different why? Different enough to kiss me on a rooftop without warning." Gabriel stood up from his chair and moved to sit on the edge of his bed, closer to where I sat at my desk. The shift in distance felt significant, like he was crossing some invisible boundary that had been established over our years of careful friendship. "You really want to know?" he asked, and there was something in his voice I had never heard before. Something vulnerable and uncertain that made my chest tighten. "Yes," I said, though part of me was terrified of what his answer might be. Gabriel looked down at his hands, then back up at me. "Different because you notice things other people miss. Different because you listen when people talk instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. Different because you make me want to be better at being myself." He paused, and I could see him gathering courage for whatever came next. "Different because when I am with you, I do not feel like I am performing. Different because you see me, really see me, not just the version of me that everyone expects. Different because I've been thinking about kissing you for months, and I finally stopped being a coward about it." The words hit me like a physical force. I stared at him, trying to process what he had just admitted. Months. He had been thinking about this for months, while I convinced myself that my own feelings were impossible and inappropriate. "And different," he continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "because I think you feel it too. This thing between us. I think you have been feeling it and try not to feel it, just like I have been." I opened my mouth to deny it, to retreat back into the safety of our friendship, to pretend that I did not know exactly what he meant. But the lie would not come. Instead, I found myself nodding, barely perceptibly, like my body was betraying the careful control I had maintained over my emotions. Gabriel smiled then, not his usual confident grin, but something smaller and more genuine. "So what do we do about it?" he asked. I did not have an answer. I had spent 2 years being Gabriel's friend, learning the boundaries of our relationship, finding comfort in its predictability. The idea of stepping outside those boundaries felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that jumping might be exhilarating or catastrophic, but unable to predict which. "I do not know," I said honestly. Gabriel nodded like he had expected that response. "That is okay," he said. "We do not have to figure it out right now." But the words hung between us like an invitation, like a door that had been opened and could not be closed again. The careful architecture of our friendship had shifted, and I could feel the foundation settling into new ground beneath us. The world between us had changed, and I knew there was no pretending it had not. In the weeks that followed our conversation, our friendship bent into something more fragile, more electric. It was like living in a house where all the familiar furniture had been rearranged in the dark. Everything looked the same during the day, but at night you found yourself bumping into edges that had never been there before. We still maintained our routines, but they carried new weight. Walking to the dining hall together, Gabriel would match his pace to mine, and sometimes a shoulder would brush against mine in a way that felt deliberate. Sitting together during our shared film studies elective, the space between us on the lecture hall bench seemed to hum with possibility. When he passed me my coffee in the mornings, his fingers would linger against mine for just a moment longer than necessary. These touches were small things, barely noticeable to anyone watching, but they accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. Each one sent electricity through my nervous system, a reminder that something fundamental had shifted between us, that we were no longer operating under the old rules of our friendship. Conversations became minefields of subtext. Gabriel would make an offhand comment about a movie he wanted to see, and I would find myself analyzing whether he was suggesting we go together, whether there was invitation hidden in the casual words. I would mention being tired, and he would offer to make me tea, and we would both know that the offer meant something more than simple kindness. The silences were even more dangerous. Gabriel had always been comfortable with quiet moments, but now they stretched between us like taut wire. I would look up from my textbook to find him watching me, his expression unreadable, and we would hold eye contact for heartbeats longer than friends should. Then one of us would look away, the moment broken but not forgotten, adding itself to the growing collection of almosts and not quites that populated our days. Our room became a laboratory for this new dynamic. In the evenings, when Gabriel worked on his art and I reviewed code, the familiar sounds of our coexistence took on new meaning. The scratch of his pencil against paper seemed louder, more intimate. When he stretched and groaned about a sore back from hunching over his drawing tablet, I found myself wanting to offer a massage, then immediately talking myself out of it. One night, while Gabriel was painting at his easel and I was lying on my bed with my laptop, he started talking about color theory. He explained how certain combinations created tension, how others provided harmony, how the space between colors could be just as important as the colors themselves. I realized he was not really talking about painting. Gabriel had always been someone who said what he meant, but now he spoke in metaphors and implications. When he told me about the sculpture he was working on, about finding balance between opposing forces, I heard him talking about us. When he mentioned how his figure drawing professor had told the class that the most interesting art happened in the spaces between intention and accident, I understood that he was describing what was happening between us. I started to notice the ways Gabriel watched me, and they were different from before. Where once his attention had been casual, friendly, now it felt searching. He would look at me while I was coding, as if he was trying to memorize something. When I laughed at something on my phone, he would smile in response, but his eyes would stay on my face longer than the moment warranted. During our film studies class, we were discussing a French New Wave film about two friends whose relationship slowly transforms into something more complex. The professor talked about the director's use of lingering close-ups, the way the camera held on moments of recognition between the characters. Gabriel leaned over during the discussion and whispered that he finally understood what the director was trying to capture. The warmth of his breath against my ear sent shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature in the lecture hall. I found myself becoming hyper-aware of my own behavior around him. Every gesture felt loaded with potential meaning. When I made coffee in the morning, I wondered if offering him a cup seemed too domestic, too intimate. When he asked to borrow my notes from computer science class, I questioned whether he really needed them or if he was looking for excuses to prolong our interactions. The tension sharpened until every moment felt like it could break into something irreversible. Gabriel would reach across me to grab something from his desk, and the brief press of his chest against my shoulder would leave me unable to concentrate for the rest of the evening. I would hand him his keys, and the brush of our palms would send heat racing through my bloodstream. One Thursday afternoon, Gabriel was lying on his bed reading while I worked at my desk. I could feel him watching me, the weight of his attention like sunlight through a window. When I finally turned around, he did not look away. Instead, he smiled, slow and knowing, and said that I looked good when I was concentrating. The comment was innocent enough, but the way he said it, the way his voice dropped slightly on the word good, made it feel like the most intimate thing anyone had ever said to me. That night, I lay awake listening to Gabriel's breathing across the room, wondering how much longer we could continue this careful dance around each other. Every day brought us closer to some kind of breaking point, some moment when the accumulating tension would demand resolution. I found myself craving that moment even as I feared it. The edge between us was sharpening, and I knew that eventually one of us would have to decide whether to step back or step forward. The choice felt inevitable and terrifying and necessary all at once. Gabriel had called me different, had kissed me, had admitted months of hidden feelings. Now, he was giving me time to catch up, to find my own courage. But I could feel that patience had limits, that even his considerable confidence had boundaries. Soon, I would have to choose. The breaking point came on a Friday night in November, when the first real snowfall of the season had blanketed the campus in pristine white silence. We had spent the evening in our usual configuration. Gabriel at his easel, working on a painting that had been consuming him for weeks, me at my desk debugging code that refused to cooperate. But the familiar rhythm felt different that night, stretched thin by weeks of accumulated tension. Gabriel had been quieter than usual, more focused on his work, but I could feel him stealing glances at me throughout the evening. Every time I looked up, he would be studying his canvas with exaggerated concentration, but I could sense the weight of his attention like heat from fire. Around 11, he set down his brush and stepped back from the painting. It was an abstract piece, all swirling blues and grays with sudden bursts of warm color that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Like most of Gabriel's work, it was beautiful in a way that made me feel slightly inadequate, as if I was missing some essential understanding about how beauty worked in the world. "What do you think?" he asked, and his voice carried an uncertainty I rarely heard from him. I stood up from my desk and moved closer to look at the painting properly. The colors seemed to shift and dance in the overhead light, creating depth and movement that drew the eye deeper and deeper into the composition. It was the kind of art that made you forget where you were standing, that pulled you into its own internal logic. "It is beautiful," I said, and I meant it. There is something about the way the colors move together, like they are having conversation. Gabriel smiled at that, the first genuine smile I had seen from him all evening. "That is exactly what I was trying to capture," he said. "The space between things. The way two elements can exist separately, but create something new when they interact." He was standing close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with the sharp scent of acrylic paint. Close enough that I could see the paint smudges on his fingers, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he had told me about months ago. Close enough that the careful distance I had been maintaining felt suddenly absurd. "Gabriel," I said, his name coming out rougher than I intended, "I need to ask you something." He turned to face me fully, setting down the brush he had still been holding. The movement brought him even closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that I had to resist the urge to step backward. "What did you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "When you said I was different, what did you really mean?" It was not the first time I had asked the question, but something about the way I said it that night made Gabriel pause, made him study my face with the same intensity he brought to his art. The silence stretched between us, filled with the distant sounds of other students in the hallway, someone playing music in a room down the hall, the whisper of snow against our window. "You really want to know?" he asked, and there was something fragile in his voice, something that made my chest tighten with anticipation and fear. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Gabriel took a step closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. His hand came up to brush against my cheek, thumb tracing the line of my jaw with a gentleness that made my breath catch. "Different because I cannot stop thinking about you," he said, his voice quiet and unsteady. "Different because with you, it never feels like I am pretending. Different because you make me want to be honest about things I have never been honest about." The words hit me like a physical force, each one carrying weight I had not expected. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me, trying to understand the magnitude of what he was admitting. "Different because I have been lying to myself for months about what I feel when I look at you," Gabriel continued, his thumb still moving against my cheek. "Different because you're the first person who has ever made me question everything I thought I knew about myself." I felt something break open inside my chest, some carefully constructed wall that had been holding back a flood of feelings I had been too afraid to acknowledge. The revelation was not just that Gabriel felt this way, but that he had been struggling with it, that he had been just as confused and frightened as I had been. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Gabriel smiled, soft and sad and relieved all at once. "Since the beginning, really. Since freshman year, when you fell asleep reading during our first week as roommates, and I spent an hour just watching you breathe. Since you started making me coffee in the mornings without me asking. Since I realized that every good thing that happened to me, the first person I wanted to tell was you." The admission flooded through me, rewriting every interaction we had shared over the past 2 years. All those moments I had dismissed as friendship, all those gestures I had convinced myself meant nothing. They had meant everything. Gabriel had been feeling this just as long as I had been hiding it just as carefully. "And it terrifies me," he continued, his forehead coming to rest against mine, "how much I want this. How much I want you. Because if we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back to being just friends." I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his breath against my lips, feeling the weight of the choice that had been building between us for weeks, finally crystallizing into this single moment. "I know," I whispered, and I realized that I did know, had known for longer than I'd been willing to admit. I had been carrying these feelings like a secret, like something dangerous that needed to be contained. But Gabriel was right. There was no pretending anymore, no returning to the safe territory of friendship. The revelation was not just that we both felt this, but that we had both been afraid of it, had both been trying to protect something that was already lost the moment Gabriel kissed me on that rooftop and called me different. We stood there in the golden light of our dorm room, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, balanced on the edge of a decision that would change everything. And for the first time since this all began, I felt ready to fall. We stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, suspended in the space between revelation and action. Gabriel's hand was still cupped against my cheek, his thumb tracing gentle circles that sent warmth spreading through my entire body. The painting behind him seemed to pulse with life in my peripheral vision, all those blues and grays and sudden bursts of color that somehow captured exactly what was happening between us. I could feel myself standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into something vast and unknowable. For 2 years, I had built my life around the safety of routine, the comfort of predictable outcomes. I had chosen computer science because algorithms had clear solutions. I had maintained careful distance in relationships because closeness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of loss. But Gabriel was asking me to step off that cliff with him, to choose the uncertain path over the safe one. And the terrifying thing was how much I wanted to say yes. "If we do this," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to keep it steady, "nothing will be the same." Gabriel did not pull away, did not try to minimize what I was saying or offer false reassurance. Instead, he nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "That is the point," he said simply, and there was something in his voice, a quiet certainty that made my chest tighten with longing and fear in equal measure. I thought about all the things that could go wrong. We could ruin our friendship, the one stable relationship I had managed to build in college. We could make things awkward for everyone around us, turn our shared spaces into minefields of tension and regret. Gabriel could decide he had made a mistake, that whatever he felt for me was just curiosity or confusion, and I would be left carrying feelings that had nowhere to go. The rational part of my mind cataloged these risks with clinical precision, the same way I debugged problematic code, identifying potential failure points, calculating probabilities, weighing costs against benefits. But there was another part of me, a part that had been growing stronger since that first kiss on the rooftop, that was tired of living entirely in my head. Gabriel seemed to sense my internal struggle. He stepped back slightly, giving me space while keeping his hand against my face. "We do not have to decide anything tonight," he said softly. "I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand what you mean to me." But even as he said it, I could see in his eyes that patience had its limits. Gabriel was not someone who could sustain uncertainty indefinitely. He lived in the present tense, made decisions with his heart first and his head second. He had been brave enough to kiss me, brave enough to admit his feelings, brave enough to put himself in the vulnerable position of waiting for my response. Now, it was my turn to be brave. "I am scared," I admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "I'm scared of ruining what we have. I'm scared of not being enough for you. I'm scared of wanting this so much that I cannot think straight anymore." Gabriel's expression softened, and he moved closer again, his other hand coming up to frame my face. "I'm scared too," he said. "I am terrified, but I am more scared of spending the rest of college pretending I do not feel this way. I am more scared of looking back in 10 years and wondering what might have happened if I had been brave enough to try." His words hit me like a revelation. I had been so focused on all the ways this could go wrong that I had not considered the possibility of regret, of spending years wondering what might have been if I had found the courage to step forward instead of back. I thought about Gabriel as I had first known him. Confident and artistic and impossibly attractive, someone who seemed to move through the world with an ease I envied. I thought about all the people who orbited around him, drawn to his energy and creativity. And then I thought about all the quiet moments we had shared, all the conversations that had stretched late into the night, all the ways he had made space for my particular brand of careful observation in his chaotic, colorful life. Different, he had called me. Not broken or insufficient or wrong, but different in a way that mattered to him. I realized that I had been approaching this like a problem to be solved rather than a choice to be made. There was no algorithm for this, no predictable sequence of inputs and outputs that would guarantee a successful result. There was only the choice to trust in Gabriel, in myself, in the possibility that something beautiful could grow from this terrifying uncertainty. I looked at him, really looked at him, taking in away the light caught in his dark hair, the paint smudge on his jaw that he had missed when washing his hands, the nervous energy that hummed beneath his apparent calm. This was Gabriel, who had been my friend for 2 years, who knew how I took my coffee and which movies made me cry and exactly how to make me laugh when I was stressed about exams. This was Gabriel, who had been thinking about kissing me since freshman year, who had called me different like it was the highest compliment he could give, who was standing here asking me to be brave enough to want something uncertain and wonderful. "You are right," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I did not want to wonder what might have been. Something shifted in Gabriel's expression, hope and relief, and something deeper flickering across his features. "So what do we do?" he asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew the answer, was already moving closer, already closing the distance between possibility and reality. This time, when I closed the gap between us, it was not stolen or unexpected. This time it was chosen. A kiss that was equal parts fear and freedom, uncertainty and absolute certainty that whatever came next, we would face it together. When we finally broke apart, Gabriel rested his forehead against mine again, both of us breathing hard, both of us smiling like we had just discovered something incredible. "So this is us now," he said, and it was not a question. "This is us now," I agreed, and for the first time in my life, the unknown felt like exactly where I belonged. 3 weeks later, we found ourselves back on the rooftop where it all began. The December air was sharp enough to sting, but neither of us suggested going inside. Gabriel sat beside me, closer than he ever had during all those months of careful friendship, his arm wrapped around my shoulders in a gesture that had become natural with surprising speed. I leaned into his warmth, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing against my side. The city stretched out beneath us, unchanged and eternal. The same neon signs flickered their pink and blue promises into the darkness. The same distant sounds of traffic and voices and urban life drifted up from the streets below. But everything felt different now, filtered through the lens of what we had become. We had not spoken much since climbing up here an hour ago. There was something peaceful about the silence, something that felt complete rather than empty. Gabriel had brought his sketchbook, as he often did now, and had spent the first part of the evening drawing while I watched the patterns of light moving across the buildings in the distance. Occasionally he would show me what he was working on, loose sketches of the cityscape, studies of shadow and light that somehow captured more than any photograph could. Tonight, though, the sketchbook lay closed beside him, forgotten in favor of simply being present in the moment. The past 3 weeks had been a study in adjustment, in learning how to be together in this new way. Some things had changed dramatically. The way Gabriel said, "Good morning now," with a softness that made my chest flutter, the way he would brush his fingers against mine when passing me coffee, the way we had started falling asleep to the sound of each other's breathing with a new kind of contentment. Other things had remained exactly the same. Gabriel still left paint-stained clothes scattered around our room. I still organized my textbooks in careful stacks and made detailed study schedules. He still told me stories about his art professors while I half listened and fully absorbed the sound of his voice. I still helped him with the computer science assignments he occasionally had to take for his degree requirements. We had found our rhythm with surprising ease, as if this had always been the natural progression of our relationship, as if those 2 years of friendship had been preparation for this deeper connection rather than something we were leaving behind. There had been awkward moments, of course. The first time Gabriel's art friends had seen us together, really together, there had been raised eyebrows and knowing smiles that made me want to disappear into my hoodie. The first time I had kissed him in public, just a quick goodbye kiss before my programming class. I had spent the entire lecture wondering if everyone was staring at me, if my feelings were somehow written across my face in letters too large to ignore. But those moments had passed, absorbed into the larger story we were writing together. Gabriel had a way of making the extraordinary feel ordinary, of treating our relationship like the most natural thing in the world. His confidence had become my anchor, his certainty a counterweight to my tendency toward overthinking. Tonight, sitting on the rooftop under a sky full of stars barely visible through the city's ambient light, I felt something settle into place inside my chest. The fear that had dominated those first weeks, fear of discovery, of judgment, of somehow getting this wrong, had gradually given way to something steadier and more sustainable. Gabriel shifted slightly beside me, tilting his head back to look up at the narrow strip of sky visible between the surrounding buildings. "Do you remember what you said?" he asked quietly, "that first night when I kissed you? You asked what I meant by different." I remembered. The question had consumed me for days, driving me to demand explanations and clarity about feelings that defied easy categorization. "I still think about that sometimes," Gabriel continued. "About how to explain what I saw in you that made me want to take that risk." "What did you see?" I asked, though I was no longer desperate for the answer the way I had been then. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, considering. "Someone who noticed things," he said finally. "Someone who paid attention not just to what people said, but to what they meant. Someone who made me feel like I could be honest about the parts of myself I usually kept hidden." He paused, then added with a smile I could hear in his voice, "Someone who made me want to be brave enough to kiss them on a rooftop and see what happened next." I turned to look at him, taking in the familiar planes of his face, the way the distant light caught in his dark eyes. 3 weeks ago, looking at him like this would have made my heart race with anxiety and longing. Now it just felt right, like coming home to a place I had always belonged. And what happened next? I asked, though I knew the answer. Gabriel's arm tightened around my shoulders, pulling me closer. This, he said simply. We happened next. The word different no longer felt like a warning or a question mark hanging over my head. It no longer felt like something that set me apart in ways that made me uncomfortable or self-conscious. Different had become something else entirely, a recognition, an appreciation, a reason rather than an obstacle. I thought about the boy I had been just a few months ago, so careful and controlled, so afraid of stepping outside the safe boundaries I had constructed around my life. That version of myself felt both familiar and foreign now, like looking at a photograph of someone you used to know well. Gabriel had called me different, and then he had shown me what that difference could become when it was met with understanding rather than judgment, with curiosity rather than fear. He had taken something I had always seen as a limitation and revealed it to be a strength. The city hummed beneath us, full of its own stories of connection and loss, of people finding each other and letting each other go. But up here, wrapped in Gabriel's warmth, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I felt like we had found something that would last. Different no longer felt like a warning. It felt like the beginning,